everybody and welcome to Hann-Made Studio. I'm Cheryl Hann-Woodlock. Today I'm going to be talking to you about making your own molds. So you want to make tiles, you want to make lots of them? I'm going to show you how. Join me soon. We'd like to say thank you for watching. Hi everybody and welcome back. The tools and materials that you are going to need for today's workshop. Some Vaseline petroleum jelly, that's your release agent for your molds. You are going to need plaster. I've got casting plaster here, but you can use plaster of Paris. That will do the job also. You are also going to need a board. I've actually got plastic over that, so any board with plastic will do the job. A little bucket of water. I've just got some bucket of water. That is to mix up our plaster. I've also got 2 containers. That's to get some sort of weight so we know the ratio that we're working with. A dust mask because we are working with plaster and it creates dust. I've also got a wedging wire because we need clay for today's workshop. It can be any sort of clay that you like. I've got a basic hand building clay. Also, we are going to need buckets of water. So here, I have 2 buckets of water. Once for my first wash, one for my second wash. 2 buckets. If you look at my other YouTube, it explains why. And I think that's about it. So stay tuned and we'll start. We're ready to start. First of all, you need to make your tile. I rolled out my clay and I've made this tile. With this tile, I need to make sure the edges, when you look front on, I can still see the sides. It's called an undercut. If your tile is angled that way, you will get an undercut. What you need to make sure is your tile is actually angled that way. Not quite a 45-degree angle, but a very slight angle. So it's actually slightly angled that way. And we've got it on the plastic. So the plastic is not going to stick to the plaster. And it protects my board. So I'm using a cement sheet board with a plastic cover on it. My next job is to make a little fence around it. This is to contain the plaster that I'm going to be pouring. And I'm going to be using clay to do it. It's nice and simple and I'll show you how. I've got my clay. I've just taken a block and I'm going to be making fat coils. So I've got the clay, going to be squishing it. It doesn't have to be brilliant. I'm just making nice fat coils. And they're not really round, it doesn't matter, but they're nice and fat. Now I'm just going to flatten one side and make it more like a triangle. So that's being flattened. Now I'm just going to flatten the bottom. So the top is flat, the top is pointy, the bottom is flatter, and it looks a little bit like a triangle. I'm ready to put this on my board. When you're putting it on your board, be careful not to touch your tile or damage it. What I've just done is I've smoothed around the edges on the inside. This is to ensure that the plaster, when I poured it, doesn't go under my little fence that I've made and leak out. It doesn't look pretty, but that doesn't matter. And I've left a gap of 1/2 inch, round about 1 centimetre, because I only need 1 centimetre around my tile. That's so when I put any pressure on it, I've still got this area that's going to be protected. If you make this area too thin, there is a chance it might break. When I'm joining this to the end, I'm just going to work that in, pop it on top, work it in. And that should ensure that my fence won't leak. You can use wooden tools to go around it to make sure it's lovely and pretty, but I'm not too worried about it looking pretty. I just want it done, nice and quick. I've done all the edges. I don't have to smooth the outside. I don't think I'm going to get any leaks. I'm now ready to make up my plaster and do some pouring. With pouring your plaster, I always make sure that the bucket I used is not going to be used for anything else. In a pottery studio, you cannot afford to get any plaster mixed into your clay or your tools. If the plaster gets into your clay, it could explode in your kiln, which is not good. So always make sure that the buckets you use are separate for each material. Here is my plaster bucket. This is the bucket that I use for all my plaster making. Now, the mix I'm going to be using, I don't weigh anything out. It is just an eyeball thing, and it's a feel. So I've got this container. It's just over a cupful. And I know that with this cupful, when I put my plaster into it, it will come around about 2 cups. That should be enough to do my 6-inch tile, 6-inch square tile. I've got my clean water. And I'm going to pour I might pour a little bit more just to make sure. There is nothing worse than not having enough. So I've got about 1 1/3 cups of water in here. Now, using the plaster, you need to make sure that the container you use is dry. There is no moisture. As soon as moisture gets into your bag, you're going to start setting it. So make sure it is dry. Now, before I do this, I'm going to have to put on my dust mask. I'm now ready to start working with my plaster. When we do this, we sprinkle it on very, very lightly, and the plaster sits on the top of the water, and as it absorbs the water, it drops down. You then sprinkle your next lot on, the water then soaks up and the plaster drops down, and you keep going. That's why you need to wear a dust mask, because we are going to make a bit of dust doing this, and we're going to start sprinkling. We're trying not to make too many bubbles, so by sprinkling it lightly, we're going to make sure that no bubbles occur. As I'm sprinkling it on, it's actually dissolving really, really quickly. As this starts to thicken, the plaster doesn't drop down as quickly. It doesn't dissolve as quickly. So that area has a lot of plaster in it. The other areas I'm going to sprinkle, and see how they dissolve quickly? I can still keep pouring some more in. You can see that there's plaster at the top. It's taking a while to dissolve. So that is almost ready. That is done. It's now almost dissolved. Now that I've finished with my plaster, it's now all damp, so I'm not going to get a lot of dust. I'm just going to clean my hands. And I've got my 2 buckets, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So I've got my 2 buckets of water. One is for my first wash. And this one is for my rinse off. This is the cleaner bucket. So it means that this bucket will get dirty quicker, but this one stays cleaner. So when I finish rinsing my hands or washing them, they're usually pretty clean. Nothing goes down the sink. If you rinse in the sink, the chances are your plaster is going to set, or the sludge in the plaster is going to get stuck in your pipes and it's going to clog your pipes. Don't do it. What I need to do now is I need to get any air bubbles that I've got unwittingly up to the surface. If you have air bubbles in your plaster, it could show up in your design as a little pinhole. So we're going to tap the sides, we're going to give it a little bit of a jiggle to get these bubbles up. And a few bubbles have come to the surface. You can see just a few there, and that's looking pretty good. The last thing I want to do with this is actually give it a good mix up. If you start mixing it up too much, you're going to create air. You're going to lift air into it. And we don't want to fold air into this. We want as less air bubbles as we possibly can. My next job is I'm just going to put my hand gently in that and just give it a little bit of a mix around. And that's feeling pretty good. As I said, I wanted to mix it up so if there were any lumps in there, I could feel it and I could get rid of them. Now, this is about ready to pour. We don't pour it straight on top of the mold. In case there are air bubbles, we start on the side. If you have a big quantity of plaster and you can't lift up your bucket, it might be easy to get a jug and pour it on. But I haven't got a lot in my hand, so what I'm going to do is pop my hand in the corner and that is poured. I'm now going to wash my hand. We're going to let that sit for 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours. What is going to happen is this plaster is going to start setting. As it sets, it will get warm, and that's when you know the chemical reaction is happening. It takes around about 4 hours. You can even leave it for a day. If you leave it for a day, it means that the mold is actually quite strong. With this bucket, I don't have to rinse it out. I can actually just leave it. By leaving it and letting it get firm, this is a little bucket, I can just sprinkle that and all the plaster is going to come off. Plaster doesn't stick to plastic. And it means then that this can then go into the bin and easily dumped into your waste. You don't have to do square tiles. This is a round tile I have made. And that is the round mold. So you can do any shape that you like. Hi everybody and welcome back. It's now 5 hours later since I originally poured this. I could leave it for a day or 2 days, that's not a problem, but we're going to unveil it. It is firm and I can still sort of scratch easily into it, but it's going to be quite okay to get out my mold. I'm going to just gently take off the sides and pull them off. This clay can be used later and it can be used for making molds, but it cannot be used for making any clay objects or put into the firing. The reason is there are pieces of plaster on it, and that plaster in the kiln will actually blow up. So we keep it separate, and that will go into a separate bag for later. I'm going to flip this over, peel it off gently, and we have, the mold is a little bit sweaty, but that's okay. And that's looking really good so far. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out this mold. I can try and keep it for later. So what I'm going to do is, I've got a ball of clay. I'm going to gently wet it, and I'm going to just press in the corners, try and grip that mold up. There you go. The corner is now released. It's actually lifted up slightly. And I'm going to go around all the corners and gently release them. I've gone around all the corners, and the corners are now lifted. I'm now going to work down the sides. That is about released, and now I'm going to flip this piece out onto my board so I can reuse it. And just gently flip it over, and that came out. So this is my original mold. There it is. And this is the mold that I made. Now on the side, it's got a little bit of an undercut. I need to trim that off now before this dries. I'm going to gently use my ribbon tool and go around the edges. So I have no undercuts. This is where the tile lifted slightly as the plaster was poured. And you can definitely see in here, that bit has gone over the edge. There we go. Definitely gone over the edge. If I don't cut that off, the tile, it's going to be an undercut, the tile won't slip out. So I'm looking at this now, looking directly over it, and I can't see any undercut. So we're good to go. Now I let this dry. You can just leave it out and it will dry in roughly about a week. It takes quite a while because it's got a lot of moisture in it. So you just be patient. The other thing too is that I've got really rough edges. I can tidy those edges up as well and just trim it off. Remember, gentle with this because it is still wet and it could easily be damaged. It's still not very strong. I've now finished my mold. All the sides have been trimmed. They're nice and smooth. There are now no sharp edges. All I have to wait is for this to dry. How do you tell when it's dry? When it doesn't feel damp anymore. If it still feels damp, wait. Once it's dry, you can start using it and making lots and lots of molds of the same things, just like this. Yay! Thank you very much for watching. I'm Cheryl Hann-Woodlock from Hann-Made Studio saying thank you. Please remember, if you liked what you saw, hit that like button, subscribe and ring that bell. And thank you for watching. Bye.